Thank you very much. I mean, I feel at home already. You're such a warm and gracious audience. I think we may have a bit of fun tonight. Whether you'll be applauding me by the time I finish with you in 45 minutes, I'm not so sure about that. But let's see how it goes now. As you see, I'm going to take you on a submarine going down beneath the surface, because on the surface, we don't know what makes a psychopathic killer, like Peter Madsen there. And by the way, yeah, that is Peter. That's not me. That's not Adrian Raine. That's Peter Madsen. He's a psychopathic killer. I'm normal. I'm totally normal. He is the killer there. But let's just see what may make a person like Peter Madsen. So this is what I'm going to be talking about. First of all, how early are the seeds of violence sown? How early in life do we have this predisposition for murderous psychopathic behavior? Next, are the brains of murderers really different to the rest of us or not? Are they just the same? And lastly, what does this body of knowledge mean for us in society? And in particular, I want to go to 3 specific societal issues. What does it mean for our ability to predict amongst us who is at risk for becoming a violent offender? Secondly, what can we do to prevent murderous violent behavior? And thirdly, what about punishment? What does this body of knowledge say for how we dispose of violent criminal offenders like Peter Madsen? Well, first, let's talk about how early in life do these predispositions come. Anyone recognize that building? Anyone given birth in that building? Excuse my Danish, it's the Rigshospitalet Hospital in Copenhagen, Denmark. And believe it or not, I did a study in that hospital. It was a study of 4,269 births. We assess birth complications at the time of birth because we think birth complications like anoxia, lack of oxygen, can damage the fetal brain and potentially give rise to future violence. We also, when the babies were aged 1 year, we had social workers visit their homes, and we were trying to measure maternal rejection of the child. What was that? Well, first of all, the mum didn't want the pregnancy. Secondly, she made an attempt to abort the fetus, but failed. These are live male births. And thirdly, the child was separated from the mum, for whatever reason, for at least 3 months in the first year of life. Okay, so we have on the one hand the biological risk factor, the birth complications. On the other hand, the environmental risk factor, negative parenting. We followed up the babies for 18 years and looked to see which ones were violent. And as you see here on the y-axis there, we have rates of violence. The control group had neither birth complications nor maternal rejection. The rejection-only group only had a negative parenting. The birth-only group only had the birth complications. The last group on the right had both the double whammy, the birth complications and the negative parenting. And what you see there is that actually the 3 groups on the left don't differ significantly to each other. But the last group did have significantly higher rates. In particular, there was a 3-fold increase in violence in that group with both the birth complications and the maternal early rejection of the child. So I think one heuristic message I want to give you tonight is that it's not simple. It's not just the environment. It's not just biology and brain factors. It's especially when we get both of these coming together, that's when we get a toxic mix that can raise the odds 3-fold of somebody growing up to become a violent criminal offender. And by the way, those findings are controlling for a lot of background social factors. Okay, so nobody's born bad, but can a bad birth predisposed to violence? In a way, it can. What else? What else early on in life? Well, poor nutrition during pregnancy. Okay, so you didn't get the Riggs Hospitalet one right. How about this one? What country is this? Yeah, that's right, Nether, you got it. Right, so it's a fascinating study, not mine. It's one by Richard Neugebauer at Columbia University. Fascinating study, because we go back to the end of World War II. So Germany are pulling out of the Netherlands, and there's a food blockade on the country. And you can see from those kids how skinny their arms and legs are, how that poor nutrition did have an effect. Some mothers were pregnant during that time. Other mothers were pregnant at a different time when food was back to normal. So we have two groups here, mums with poor nutrition during pregnancy and mums who had normal nutrition. Neugebauer followed them up, and Neugebauer found that if a mum had poor nutrition during pregnancy, her offspring are 2.5 times more likely to grow up to become antisocial personality disordered, which is a psychiatric term basically meaning a life course criminal offender. So of course, again, poor nutrition is critical for fetal brain development. And we believe if you interfere with brain development, one can get a predisposition to later violence and antisocial behavior. Okay, so poor nutrition. What else? What else early in life can give a push towards violence and potentially murderous behavior? Well, smoking during pregnancy. And again, we go back to data from Copenhagen on this. This is data by my postdoctoral student, Patricia Brennan. And basically, again, it's that birth cohort from Copenhagen. And here's the findings. So we were measuring the number of cigarettes the mum smoked during the 3rd trimester of pregnancy. On the left, 0. Well, that bar, the mums didn't smoke at all. Going all the way to the right-hand side to mums smoking more than a pack of cigarettes a day. And again, on the y-axis up there, you can see percent of violent crime in those babies 34 years later. And what, of course, you see is a dose-response relationship. The more cigarettes the mum smokes during pregnancy, the higher the rates of violence in the offspring. Again, controlling for a lot of background social factors, because mums who smoke cigarettes during pregnancy are not exactly the same as mums socially who don't smoke cigarettes during pregnancy. And more than 20 studies have found this. This is a very well replicated finding. The birth complications finding is replicated also in Sweden and Canada and the United States. Okay, so that's another factor, smoking during pregnancy. What else? Drinking during pregnancy. Yeah, see, no, I'm not saying you're pregnant, but you've got the glass there. I hope you're not pregnant because, good, that's good to know. Okay, well, not that you know. Drinking during pregnancy. Well, although actually there's a point here, because when do you really know that you're pregnant and when do you drink, when do you not drink? But drinking during pregnancy. Fantastic data by a researcher called Streisguth. I want to highlight her research findings. She has a sample of 473 individuals with fetal alcohol syndrome, which is a condition obtained when the mum drinks quite heavily during pregnancy. And indeed, babies born with fetal alcohol syndrome have craniofacial abnormalities. If you take a look at that baby who has fetal alcohol syndrome, the eyes are more widely spaced, the ears are lower on the head circumference is smaller, lack of development of the nasal bridge, the philtrum, this part, the philtrum is underdeveloped in these babies. Key point here is Streisguth followed up these babies into adolescence. And there's the rates in these kiddies of delinquency, police contacts, being arrested, convicted. Now, there's plenty of reasons why this is the case. I mean, if a mum drinks a lot during pregnancy, well, maybe she doesn't care too much for her fetus. And if that's the case, maybe she's not going to care too much for her child as the child is growing up. And negative parenting, whether from the father or the mother, is a well-replicated risk factor for violence later in life. But we also know that alcohol consumption during pregnancy is toxic to the developing brain. So this is the brain of a baby that died at 6 weeks of age for reasons other than fetal alcohol syndrome. And this is the brain of a baby that also died at 6 weeks of age, but due to fetal alcohol syndrome. And we can see the ravages that alcohol does to the brain. And the harsh reality is that there's no safe level of alcohol in this respect. This also raises another question. I want you to take a close look at this baby, and we can ask ourselves a number of questions. Does this baby have fetal alcohol syndrome? Yes, it does. You can see it in its face. Is this baby more likely to grow up and become a criminal offender and violent offender? Yes, it is. We've seen the data. Is this baby responsible for the fact that its mom took alcohol during pregnancy? I hear you say it. No, it's not. Will we hold this baby responsible for its crimes? Yes, we will. My question to you is that justice? Is that your idea of justice? Because it's not mine. But the problem with my conclusion is, who are we going to blame? We need somebody to blame. Who will we blame? Anyone got an answer to that? Any person we should blame here? The mother. Now, that sounds a little bit crazy, but it's not too far-fetched, at least in the United States. Let me tell you why. This is Jamila Falls, Memphis, Tennessee. And she gave birth to a lovely little girl, not quite born on the 4th of July, but born on the 5th of July. The only problem is that the baby on its birth tested positive for heroin and marijuana. In Tennessee, they enacted a new law to make this an assault of the mother on the fetus. And she's convicted of assault and sentenced to 6 months in prison. Assault, by the way, is the legal term that is used. The question I think we have to ask ourselves here is this the way we want society to go? To have more responsibility to parents, to reduce negative parenting, and produce better care for the future generation? Or is that not the case, and does Jamila Falls need help and not handcuffs? I don't know what you think about that. I'm going to tell you what my answer to that question is. I think we need both. I think we need more responsibility, and people like Jamila Falls need help. But again, we can agree to disagree this evening. Okie doke. So that's the beginning, early risk factors that raise the odds of people becoming violent. Let's now turn to murderers, and specifically that question, are the brains of murderers the same as ours? Are they different? And if so, in what way? My first academic job was in England, but I emigrated to the United States. And one of the reasons for that is that in England, I couldn't get a lot of murderers together to put in a brain scanner. But in Los Angeles, there's loads of murderers wandering around. And so what I could do is take 41 murderers, put them in a brain scanner, match them carefully to 41 controls, and compare their brains. So this is what I found. Let me orient you here. You're looking down on the brain. You've got a bird's eye view. The red and yellow killers indicate high glucose metabolism or high brain functioning. And the cool colors, blue, green, indicate low brain functioning. Again, I don't have my pointer, but what you can see, I think, see at the top of the murderer, that part of the brain is down in functioning. That part of the brain is called the prefrontal cortex. It sits right above your eyes and lies right behind your forehead. Why might poor functioning of that part of the brain predispose to homicide? Well, amongst other things, the prefrontal cortex is involved in emotion regulation. It's involved in impulse control. And let's think of it. I mean, all of us get angry at times, don't we? But what stops us lashing out and killing someone? Well, we've all got a good frontal function, or at least I hope all of you have good frontal functioning, which tells you, no, don't lash out now. Count to 10, take a deep breath, step back a little bit. Let's think about this situation. Think of it as the guardian angel on behavior. But if, the guardian angel is asleep, as it is in some murderers, well then, the devil can come out. People can get killed. There's two important caveats I want to make about these findings as an example. The first one is that it's more complex than that because not all murderers are the same. One of my murderers was a serial killer. Very nice man, Randy Kraft. He killed 64 people in a 12-year period just south of LA, almost without being caught. And in fact, Randy was very lucky to be caught. He was driving late on the freeway one night, and of all the stupid things he did, he made an illegal lane change. Anyone ever done that? Well, it was his unlucky night because the California Highway Patrol were right there. They needed to ticket someone. They pulled Randy over, and they only became suspicious when they found a dead body in the passenger seat. Bit of a giveaway. Otherwise, Randy could be out there killing even right now. But if you take a look at Randy's brain scan, that's the one in the middle, you can see it's different to the other two. Look at the very top, that's the prefrontal cortex. He's got good frontal lobe functioning. So that's one caveat. It's not one size fits all. Murderers do differ. The second caveat to make is this. We had another person with this brain scan. Now, do a little bit of pattern recognition here. Look at the top brain scan and which of the three piles would you put it in? The normal, the one-off murderer, the serial killer? All of them? All of them? Serial killer? I mean, it's not perfect, is it? It's not perfect, but by and large, roughly, it looks a bit more like the serial killer. By the way, the very bit in the middle, those two areas activated, that's the thalamus, activated there. Good frontal lobe functioning, different to what you see in the normal or the one-off murderer. The point to make about that brain scan is that it's my brain scan. And the point to make about this is it's not that you're at risk later tonight having a cocktail with me in the bar. I promise you, you'll get home safe, you will live. That's not the point. The point is brain imaging is not diagnostic. We cannot use imaging to say, who's normal? Who's a one-off killer? Who's a serial killer? No, there are ostensibly normal people like myself with abnormal brain functioning, and conversely, there are abnormal people, killers, with totally normal brain functioning. There are no one-to-one relationships. Nevertheless, we are beginning to get some clues about what brain areas, when dysfunctional, could predispose especially to impulsive, unplanned homicide. The second brain area I want to mention tonight, only I've got time to talk about two, is the amygdala. If you ask a neuroscience what part of the brain is critically involved for emotion, they will say the amygdala. It's deep in the brain. And the other side to this is I want to talk about psychopaths. I think, as you know, psychopaths are criminal offenders who lack conscience, they lack remorse, they lack guilt, they lack shame. They don't experience the same emotions that we do. The question is why? We were interested in that, so we brain scanned 27 psychopaths, compared them to 32 non-psychopathic individuals, and what we found is an 18% volume reduction in the size of the amygdala. That's that bilateral structure you see there with the bits of blue in. A bit of blue tells you what part of the amygdala is structurally deformed. Okay, so that's telling us that perhaps structural impairment to the amygdala may be one of the reasons why psychopaths are so callous and so unemotional and are so lacking in empathy. Because the part of the brain critically involved in these emotions seems to be physically impaired. Not just that, we also find it's functionally impaired. So I want to talk about moral decision-making. And we're learning a lot about brain areas involved in moral decision-making by putting people like you into a scanner and giving you a moral dilemma. So I want you to imagine you're in a scanner. And I'm going to give you an example of the moral dilemmas we gave individuals. I think you may be familiar with it, some may not. It's called the Footbridge Dilemma. I think you've seen this one before, haven't you? Right. So you've got a runaway trolley that's going to kill 5 railway workers. But you're standing on a footbridge overlooking the railway line. Standing next to you is a large gentleman. Yes, you've guessed it. The only way that you can save these 5 lives is you've got to push the big guy off the bridge. He dies, but he stops the train, and you save the railway workers. I want you to think right now about what you would do. Say nothing, I want you to think. Come on, push him off, right? Yeah, I mean, it's a no-brainer, it's 5 to 1. 1 life for 5. You've got to do it. Plus, the guy's a beast anyway. He'll die early of heart disease, so give his life some meaning and, 1 life for 5. Tell his family, you saved 5 people. On the other hand, thou shalt not kill. Hence the dilemma. I'm actually not interested so much in what your answer would be, but more how you felt when you were going through that. Because most of us going through these personal moral dilemmas feel uncomfortable to a certain degree, anxious. And one of the reasons for that is that the amygdala, the emotional amygdala, is being activated, giving us this moral sense. We put, every red dot there is a person. And they differed in their degree of psychopathy, which you see on the bottom axis there. On the left are low scores of psychopathy, on the right, high scores of psychopathy. On that y-axis there, you've got amygdala activation. And we get a correlation. The higher the psychopathy score, the lower the amygdala functioning. So it goes along with that structural imaging data saying that the emotional amygdala seems to be shut down, relatively speaking, in psychopathic offenders who are many times more likely to kill than other offenders who are not psychopathic. So scientifically, it's telling us something about the etiology, the cause of psychopathy. But I think also it raises, at least to me, a moral question. Because it's like this. The Hannibal Lecters of this world, they know right from wrong at a cognitive level. He knows it's wrong to eat somebody's liver with fava beans and a nice Chianti. He knows it's wrong to kill. But does Hannibal Lecter and people like him have the feeling, the emotional feeling, for what is right and wrong. Because I would argue it's that emotional feeling that drives moral behavior. And if the emotional amygdala is burned out in psychopaths, then how moral is it of us to punish psychopaths as harshly as we do? Because, psychopaths never ask to have, an amygdala that's 3 sizes too small. They never ask for that. I'm going to come back to that issue, but what I want to do now is turn to the broader societal issues, in this case, prediction. Okay, could we put together, or could we gain knowledge from brain imaging that helps us understand who amongst us is at risk for committing violence? So this is a study I did with my colleague Dustin Pardini. We brain scanned young men in the community, aged about 18 to 21, and we measured the size of the amygdala because we believed that reduced amygdala volume is a risk factor for future crime. And then we followed them up for 3 years and found out which ones had committed violence and how much. So we've got 2 groups: the young men with low amygdala volumes, the young men with high or normal amygdala volumes. And these are the rates of violence 3 years after the brain scan. And the key finding there is that the group with low amygdala volume, they have a 57% rate of violence 3 years after the scan, compared to the control group, where their rate of violence was 18%. So a 3-fold increase in rates of violence in these individuals. And that's controlling for background aggression and violence and psychopathy, which we assessed at baseline. So could it be that brain imaging is giving us some added value in our ability to predict who is going to be a risk for society? What if, for example, with Peter Madden, what if we had been able to brain scan him earlier on in life and combine it with other risk factors, and if we find the risk factors coalescing, could we have given him some treatment, and that would have prevented that homicide in the submarine? Counterpoint, and if you've seen that movie 20 years ago, remember it, Tom Cruise, Minority Report? It's a great movie if you've never seen it, but it's all about stopping crime before it starts. The preemptive strike. You arrest somebody just before they're about to commit murder because you've got information telling you they're going to commit murder. What are the civil liberties issues here? Not necessarily now, but in the future, because I sense more and more that if we put together genetic with brain, with psychological and social factors, combine that with machine learning in the future, we'll do a much better job of knowing who amongst us is a risk to society. And perhaps that preemptive strike may not be as far away as we think. The next issue in society is prevention. It's really hard. It's a big nut to crack to stop violence and psychopathy. And if part of that is due to poor brain functioning and structure, what can we do to boost the brain to improve behavior? Right, well, I'll show you some data by Joe Hibbeln. And what Joe did, he plotted seafood consumption as a function of homicides in 26 countries throughout the world. And yes, you see it, he got a chunky big correlation, pretty significant relationship. The more seafood you eat, the lower the homicide rates. I mean, look on the right-hand side, look at Japan. They eat more than their whole body weight in fish every year. Low homicide rates. Go to the Eastern European countries, Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, low seafood consumption, high homicide rates. I don't know what you're thinking or asking. You're asking, where's Denmark? Yeah, Joe Hibbeln actually never reported the data. Before I left my hotel, just for you, I looked up the data. And again, I don't have my pointer, but you would be right where Hong Kong is. Very, very close to Hong Kong. Yep. You see, you eat a ton of fish. You eat 58.1 grams of fish every day. That's the average person. I looked that up. And that's why you're so nice and lovable and beautiful people, and non-violent. Okay, and I know you're laughing at this because, it sounds fishy, doesn't it? More fish, less homicide. And it's a correlation. And correlation is not causation. The only way, again, that we can prove causation is by doing randomized controlled trials, giving kids, adolescents, offenders more omega-3, and looking to see whether it changes their antisocial and aggressive behavior. So far, I've conducted and published 5 of these randomized controlled trials in different populations. Only got time to show you one, which is an exemplar. It's a study I did on young offenders in Singapore. I've done this in Singapore, Hong Kong, Mauritius, and the United States. Get the same sort of results. And we give the offenders a fruit juice drink containing 1 gram of omega-3 every day. The control group get the same fruit juice drink. It's from Norway, except it doesn't contain omega-3. It's a double-blind study. Nobody knows what they're getting. We measure impulsive, aggressive, antisocial behavior, and these are the data. They have the treatment for 3 months. The green line on the omega-3 group, what you see is that at the end of the treatment, they go down, and even when the treatment is finished, at 6 months, 12 months, they stay down. Compared to the blue line, who are the controls, who just had the placebo drink. So omega-3 is critical for brain structure and function. Could it be that something as simple as more omega-3 at a population level, like you have in Denmark, could do something about reducing violence and aggression in society? I don't think you would object to me oiling the brains of offenders with omega-3 to improve brain functioning and reduce aggression. But would you allow me to go into the brain and electrically stimulate somebody's brain to do the same thing? Well, that's what we've been doing. And this is called transcranial direct current stimulation. This is my graduate student who published these data. Double-blind, randomized controlled trial. One group, we gave them frontal lobe stimulation to enhance the prefrontal cortex, which we found to be dysfunctional in aggressive individuals. The control group think they're getting the stimulation, but they're not. The next day, we bring them back into the lab and we give them a social vignette to assess their intention to commit a violent act. What's a social vignette? Well, you're given this situation. You're in the bar with your girlfriend and you go to the toilet. You come back and there's this blighter chatting up your girlfriend. So you go to him and say, hey, that's my girlfriend. And he says, no, she's not wearing a ring. She can speak to anyone she likes. Push comes to shove. The question is, would you pick up the bottle of beer and whack the blighter on the head with it? Right, so it's intention to commit a violent act. The green bars are those who got the prefrontal stimulation. The blue bars are the sham group. We see a significant reduction in the intention to commit a violent criminal act. The same is true for sexual assault. Now look, it's only one study. We need replication and extension. And I have to tell you, so far, the findings are mixed. If you only give one session of stimulation, what if we gave more every day for a week, for a month? Could we really make a difference by enhancing the brain to improve impulse control and emotion regulation? Lastly, I want to turn to the thorny issue, which I've alluded to, of punishment. Because the question, as I've been hinting at, is if these early factors come almost before the child is born, and other factors too, to coalesce, to put them on a path to violence and homicide, then what do we do about that from a moral standpoint, from the question of how much should they be punished or excused? I want to illustrate this issue, this ethical issue, with a case study. This is Michael. He's in his second marriage. It's a stable marriage. He's 40 years old, and he's a school teacher. And importantly, he's got no history previously of psychiatric disorder or any type of sexually deviant behavior. But then things began to change. I'm going to show you a 3-minute clip where you'll hear from Michael about the change that occurred. You'll hear from his wife, and you'll hear from his 12-year-old stepdaughter. And then I'm going to finish the story for you.
I didn't see anymore, didn't hear of anymore, had no suspicions of any until February 14, which is Valentine's Day of 2000. And I went to put a Valentine's Day card in his, the carrier that he took to work with him every day. And in there I saw that there was pornography. And I was horrified and so scared because you can't take porn to school. You just can't do that. You risk everything.
Michael was starting to act out of character in other more frightening ways.
It seemed as though he was just always on edge, always angry. You know, he was taking pills every day because he was having these massive headaches. And we can remember this horrible argument we had on Thanksgiving Day where he grabbed my hair and actually pulled out, you know, some of my hair. And then it was at that point I called a counselor and said, you know, we need some help.
In the months which followed, the stepfather, husband, and high school teacher began to lead a double life.
A ball rolling downhill. It just gained speed. Pornography and strip clubs accelerated and expanded to massage parlors. But all of this is a desire towards grown women.
And then in May, I found a magazine called Barely Legal, which showed young girls who supposedly are legal, but frankly look like they're 13, 14 years old. And I was absolutely furious. I took Christina, she and I went to my mother's to stay with her for a couple of weeks while I thought about what to do. Just sort of like this kind of look of, what?
Anne's daughter Christina was 12 years old when she too started to notice changes in Michael's behavior.
Like, I've always been really, really close to my parents. They would lay down with me at night before I would go to sleep and maybe like sing me a lullaby or something like that. And it went on until I was way old. I remember like he would lay down with me and then that's when it started. It would always happen at night.
My wife started a nighttime class 2 days a week. She didn't get home until 10 o'clock at night. But when my stepdaughter laid down with me in her pajamas, I began to, not always, but sometimes, be a little more intimate with her than I should. And somewhere deep, deep, deep in the back of my head, there was a little voice saying, you shouldn't do this. But there was a much larger voice saying, what the heck, why not?
So Michael was found guilty of child molestation, and he either had to go to prison or go into a treatment group. Michael, of course, chose to go into the treatment group, but in that group, he began to sexually proposition the other female staff. So he was thrown out of the treatment, and he had to go to prison. The night before he was due to go to prison, he developed a terrible headache, but so would you if you're going to prison as a pedophile. He went to hospital complaining of the headache, complaining of suicidality, and they admitted him into the psychiatric ward under the diagnosis of pedophile. And even there, he began again to sexually proposition the female nurses. And on one occasion, he wet his trousers, but showed no emotion, no embarrassment, no shame, no awkwardness. So an astute neurologist had him brain scanned, and they found a tumor growing from the base of the prefrontal cortex, that's the white that you see there, compressing the prefrontal cortex. They resected the tumor, they took it out, and it was night and day. Michael was completely different. The emotions had come back, the sexual feelings had all gone away. He was very remorseful and penitent at everything that he'd done. They put him back into the treatment program, which he successfully completed, and he went back to live with his wife and his stepdaughter, Christina. And it's almost like a happily ever after story, except after 6 months, the headaches came back. And Michael's wife found child pornography on his computer. This time she divorced him because she couldn't risk him living with Christina. But they re-brain scanned Michael and they found the tumor had grown back. So they cut out the tumor for the second time. And we know for at least 6 years since then, Michael has been completely normal. It's only a case study, but it's fascinating, the temporal ordering of events. You're on the jury, you've seen the evidence, and I want you to answer this question of, is Michael responsible? It's a yes or no question. That's what you have on the jury. If you could raise the lights a little bit so I could see people, because I want to have a show of hands here, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. Would you please put up your hand if you would not find Michael responsible? Thank you, hands down. Hands up if you would find Michael responsible. Thank you, hands down. It's pretty well, as far as I can see, a 50-50 split amongst you. Legally, Michael is responsible. Why is that? He has what we call rational capacity, at least in English law and law in the United States. What is rational capacity? Two things. Do you know what you're doing at the time? And do you know what you're doing is wrong? Think back to the very last thing Michael said in the video. Little voice in the back of my head said, shouldn't do this. But a much bigger voice saying, what the heck, why not? He knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing was wrong. Michael is responsible. Even Michael says that. I'm the one to blame, I did it. But is it justice to blame Michael when we think the cause of the pedophilia is something completely beyond his control? And even Michael says, look, hold me as accountable as somebody who did the same thing but didn't have the brain tumor? No, I don't think so. And here I agree with Michael. I don't think we should hold him accountable. But where does this go ultimately? We've had the abuse excuse. Are we getting the brain excuse? And where does it end? Where does responsibility go? That's the other side of the coin that we have to consider. Just to summarize everything I've been saying, yes, the seeds of violence are sown even before the child is born. But the good news is that these are health risk factors that we can remediate, we can change. Yes, the brains of murderers are different. There's a lot more to it than the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, but two key areas that predispose to homicide and violence. Prediction, I don't know. We want to protect society, don't we? But can we have situations where innocent people are taken out of society simply because they've got a bunch of risk factors that we believe raise the odds of violence, even if they haven't actually committed homicide or violence just yet? Prevention. Is it ethical of people like me to go into the Holy of Holies, go into the brain, change your essence with a goal of reducing crime and violence. And lastly, how responsible are murderers? Is murder a choice? Is paedophilia a choice? That's an issue, I think, that we have to begin to think and reflect upon. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.